Welcome to the Dreamit Dose. For B2B startups, crossing $1 million in annual recurring revenue, or ARR, is a magical moment. It feels like you're finding product market fit, and investors will now take you more seriously. So how do you determine the best early potential companies to focus on that will help you cross this magical ARR threshold as quickly as possible? Let's dive in. Dreamit Ventures has been investing in great early-stage startups for over a decade. The Dreamit Dose allows us to share best practices to help even more founders. Tell us about your great startup using the links below. Before we go headfirst into this topic, I want to make sure that we are 100% on the same page on what exactly ARR is. We see so many startups create confusion for themselves and investors around the term. ARR is a very important metric for most investors, and it's critical that you use the term correctly. Let's define ARR by covering what it is not. It is not one-off hardware or product sales. It is not money paid for a proof of concept or trial. It's not fees charged for implementation services or one-off non-recurring revenue. All of the above are revenue, but are not recurring revenue and should not be counted as such. We hear startups interchangeably use the terms ARR and revenue. Avoid making that mistake. Further, often startups will mistakenly count total contract value, or TCV, as though it's ARR. For example, when we ask about ARR, a startup will tell us they signed a contract for $300,000. We ask, wait, is that a multi-year contract? Many times the answer is yes, and it turns out to be something like a 2-year deal. So if that's the case, the startup's $300,000 contract should be stated as $150,000 in ARR. Oh, and wait. If in that contract it includes implementation services and other non-recurring charges, those need to be removed to discover the true ARR. Net-net, when speaking to investors, make sure you're talking about ARR correctly and not intermixing non-recurring revenue or adding the total value of multi-year contracts into your ARR. Okay, end of rant. Let's start hitting ideas on where to focus to break through the $1 million ARR threshold. To get there as quickly as possible, make sure you are prioritizing and focusing on companies and opportunities that have the highest pain point for the problem you're solving. We see a lot of startups stall in trying to get to $1 million in ARR. Their sales pipeline is full of companies that have the problem, but it's not a big and urgent need for them. The time to close those mildly affected companies drags on. Those potential customers don't have a strong sense of urgency or forcing function to get your solution in place as quickly as possible. Keep in mind, as the level of pain a company feels goes up, the time to close goes down. Therefore, to close sales more quickly, you should focus on potential customers experiencing the greatest pain. The next type of potential customer I want you to target is those that are the easiest to close. Sometimes we see startups going after huge companies that are well-known brands that they know are going to be extremely difficult to sell to. This is often a mistake. Going after lesser-known brands may seem counterintuitive, but it can be a great way to gain early customers. Instead of trying to hook, fight, and land a 1,000-pound tuna, go after the smaller fish. Often startups don't want to go after easy fish, as it's like, well, what's the sport in that? Screw sport. This is about closing customers and building revenue. Think about focusing on your ideal customers that are the easiest to close. Next, to get past $1 million in ARR, make sure you're targeting potential customers that are extremely well aligned with your go-to-market strategy. If you haven't seen our dose on the topic, please make sure to check it out. Most startups don't have a solid go-to-market strategy, and in that dose, we quickly explain what you need to do to put it together correctly. A quick summary is, I want you to create a litmus test of the top criteria that describe your ideal early adopters. Using this litmus test, you'll figure out how to focus your efforts on potential customers that have those characteristics and a higher likelihood to purchase. Next up, an overall way of thinking about a lot of these things is to apply a sales methodology like BANT, which stands for Budget, Authority, Need, and Timing. This sales approach has been around since the 60s, and there are many similar strategies. Sadly, many early-stage startups aren't even aware of these sales approaches. BANT does a nice job of integrating several items we've talked about. First, budget. How much is the target customer able and willing to spend? In your discussions, make sure customers have the budget to bring in your solution in the time frame you're looking to close early sales. Now, let's talk about authority. Does your main point person at the target customer have the authority to purchase your product? You can deftly ask something along the lines of, who do we need to get a yes from to move forward with this purchase? Next up, let's talk about need. We talked earlier about pain points. When discussing BANT, need simply means, do they have an urgent problem, aka need, that your product solves? The last part of BANT is the T, timing. In this case, we mean, is there enough urgency? Is there some forcing function that's going to drive them to purchase sooner rather than later? Okay, the last item I want to cover is land and expand. We hear a lot of startups talk a good game about how they're going to use a land and expand sales approach. You know, once they get in the door of a potential customer and get one department or team using it, they'll be able to expand that customer, get more departments and teams, and generate even greater revenue. The problem we see frequently, the startup has no real examples of land and expand working. So prove out that you can get land and expand to work for you. Not only will you get to your $1 million ARR revenue threshold more quickly, but in your next investor pitch, you'll have evidence that your land and expand strategy actually works. Okay, that's it. Those are 6 things you should focus on when trying to get your company to $1 million in ARR. First, make sure when an investor asks you about ARR, you're using the term correctly and talking about revenue that truly recurs. Second, focus on potential customers that have huge pain around the problem you're solving. Sales will close more quickly. Third, focus on potential customers that are easiest to close. Don't just chase after big logos, which are usually harder to get. Fourth, make sure the customers you are targeting are aligned with your well thought through and finely tuned go-to-market strategy. Fifth, apply the BANT or similar sales method. Make sure you have clarity on budget, authority, need, and timing. Finally, sixth, if you're claiming a land and expand approach, make sure you prove that it works. Your ARR and investors will thank you. That's it. That's your Dreamit Dose. Please leave your questions in the comments section. If you found this video valuable, please like and subscribe. We have a lot more coming. To see all of our doses, go to dreamit.com/dose. See you next time. Was it a whole different section? I don't know. I'm just a reading fool. I just read. You put it up, I read. But it can be a great way to gain early. So let's rip through brands that have the characteristics that would make them the high level. I screwed it up again. Sorry.